Greetings. Today we're going to talk about how to make floppy disks, physical floppy disks, for a TRS-80 Model 1. But a brief intro is in order. Some of you, or for those of you who have been following the channel, I've been doing quite a bit of TRS-80 stuff, both Model 1 and Model 3 lately. And the reason I like TRS-80s is my first PC was a TRS-80 way back. But then of course I sold everything I had and jumped on the IBM PC bandwagon and all of that. But around 2007 I started to get interested again in TRS-80s. I wanted to relive my misspent youth, and I was going through the local ads, and I found a guy about a half hour away from my workplace that was selling a TRS-80 and a monitor. And I made an appointment. I drove up there after work, and yes, he had the TRS-80 itself, not this specific one, but one like it. I still have that one, but this one was handy, and a monitor. And it was kind of cheap, and he quoted me a cheap price. He didn't want to turn it on and start arguing about what worked and what didn't. Anyway, I bought it, and I brought it home, and of course the TRS-80 didn't work. The monitor I bought did work, but it looked like this. It displayed garbage. It was a pretty quick fix on the TRS-80, and then I had a TRS-80 and a monitor. And I'm just kind of simulating this right now, but and we'll get into the expansion interface and the drive, but in order for this to come up correctly, you hold down the brake key and you hit reset, and it ignores the fact that you have a floppy controller in here and a floppy drive, and it just comes up in Radio Shack mode, in normal mode. However, this has 16K, and the expansion interface has another 32K. So if you print the mem amount, it'll tell you that you have 48K free. Well, great, I played around a little bit with it, typed some things in, tried to load stuff off of cassette, and kind of set it aside and said, hey, I need to expand this. And a few months later I found an expansion interface, this, and a floppy drive. It was a silver one, matched that, but again, this drive was handy sitting on my shelf, so I hooked this one up. And then I sat there, and what happens is, if you turn on the system with an expansion interface, it tries to load a floppy disk. So, and if it can't, it shuts off and just sits there. So at that point, I needed a floppy drive, a floppy disk with something on it. So what I did next was I did an internet search, and I looked on eBay and stuff like that, but I found a site, TRS-80.com, which seemed to be the authority on TRS-80 stuff. And there was software on there, there was all sorts of stuff. And at one point, the site said that, tell us if you need a floppy disk. We'll make one for you, or two, but we like a donation. And I think I asked for 2 OS disks, and I think the donation was $5 a disc, but what arrived in the mail was these 2 discs. If you can see it. One's a disc with TRS-DOS version 2.3, and another one was New DOS 3.0. And, $5 a disc, that's very reasonable. I figured I'll get these discs and I'll play around, test things. But a little while after that, I guess there was an effort made on the internet to get rid of all sites that I mean, at least in the US, that let you download commercial software. I mean, it was the time a little later Nintendo started it, cleaned off every ROM that was displayed on websites. Again, this mostly applied to the US, but the TRS-80.com site, I guess, got letters from lawyers, and they immediately withdrew all software support, or this kind of stuff, what I did. So at that point, I couldn't even go back and buy more discs from him, because he had been enjoined by lawyers to not do so anymore. But I had my 2 discs, and so I took the TRS-DOS 2.3 disc, I inserted it, come on, go in, reset the machine, and boom, it worked. Actually, the first time I did it, the drive kept trying and trying and trying, but I went in and I lubricated the drive rails and just blew all the dust out, and it booted up. Well, great. So now I had an OS disk, and actually TRS-DOS has a backup program on it that will back up a DOS disk for you. Well, I guess the original disk, this is kind of what it did in the beginning. I guess the directory got stepped on this disk. So, directory reader. So what we are going to do, well, the assumption is that this is what I was supposed to do after I got the floppy. So if you look at the directory, you got this. Oh, and I guess, yeah, it has backup program, but I guess that's a DOS command in this case. So what this allowed you to do was you could back up the DOS disk. Now, as you saw, my original disk failed, but a copy I've made a while ago seems to be functional. So what we do is we run backup, and it asks us for the source, the destination. Since I only have one drive, which is all I had then, it's the same. It asks for the date, and we'll give it a period correct date. And then it asks for the source disk. So it's going to check the source disk. Is there anything valid on it? Yes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this original disk that the directory has failed on, remove the write protect tab that you can see on the right, and basically back up the disk we have in the drive to this. So we have a good copy of the good times past. Okay, once the destination disk, what I did with this disk in the meanwhile is I bulk erased it. And because when it tries, it checks to see if the destination disk is formatted. And on this one, it would detect that it is formatted, and then just try copying it. But the bad directory sectors or tracks would have probably prevented it from making a proper copy. So by bulk erasing it, it's going to know that there's really nothing on that disk. And what it's going to do, it's going to start formatting the disk. And then actually do a single drive backup of the original disk I put in, and I'll have a copy of the original disk I had. So after a few disk swaps, since it was using the same drive, it thinks it successfully copied it. Here's the original disk. And so now, when you hit enter, it'll reboot the system. So let's see if I got the original disk back to working condition. And yes. And the big test is, can we see a directory on it? Yeah, it's fixed. So what happened here is, unfortunately, the TRS-80 Model 1 is famous for eating disks if you turn on power, because the circuitry doesn't stabilize and it can accidentally turn on the drive and put it into write mode and kill whatever track it's on. So it's very important that if you power cycle a Model 1, such as this, you open the disk drive door, so when you're turning it on, it can't eat the disk. So I was at a point where I could make backups of the DOS disks, both of them, and everything was great. But you know, you can play DOS only so much. I needed to get a bunch of other images, games preferably, to play on here. But at that time, there was no easy way to do this. There is a program that'll make disk images for you. It's called Image Disk. But yeah, great. So on a PC, it would read in existing disks and make a software file, but that didn't do me any good because I had a file and I had no idea how to get that on a disk, and especially on a Model 1, the image disk created couldn't be written on most other PCs because they use this weird copy protection where they put a deleted address mark on one of the directory tracks, and you need this specific floppy disk controller, which is a Western Digital 1771, to write a track with deleted, or a sector with a deleted address mark. And other computers can't do it, and they just fail at it. So even if you have a PC with a double density, or a single density, double density drive, it will attempt to write the image, but it won't load on this. So I was stuck. So there wasn't a whole lot I could do at that point. I mean, there were images floating around in different formats of disks people had ripped, but and there were some products out there, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense, and I kind of shelved this thing for a while. And a few years later, I read about this product here. It's called the HxC, and it's a floppy emulator. It was invented by a guy in France. He's quite active. I'm sorry, I'll put his name into the comments. And a company in Poland built these. Now, why is this? What is this? I mean, this is the HxC, but what is this? It's here for two reasons. One is it's an enclosure that has a power supply. It's actually a SCSI enclosure with a 200 meg drive in it. So I'm powering it off of that because it has a power switch. But the main reason is it's just a little board. And when you plug in ribbon cables into small boards like this, I mean, you have to tape them to your desk or something. And this format, the format of this doesn't lend itself very well to even 3D printed cases. So I found the best thing to do was to mount it on a boat anchor that also gave me power. And so that's it. So how does this work? Well, it takes a 34-pin floppy connector and power. It's sitting, on the floppy cable. And when the machine boots up, it tries to read what's on the SD card. And by the time, I mean, when this came out, I think I got it a few months, if not a year after it appeared, there were a whole bunch of disk images floating around the web that you put onto this card and selected an active image, and then it would act as a disk drive. Now, one thing you will notice is I also have the floppy disk next to it hooked up. This is drive 0 and that is drive 2. And a little later you'll find out why drive 1. Well, actually the reason drive 1 is not, this is not drive 1, is one feature of this board is that it can actually emulate two drives, drive 0 and drive 1. And you get to select different images on here. So this is really a two-drive system. So everything's hooked up right now. I'm going to power up the whole system. We don't have to remove the floppy from this because it doesn't kill him. So here it goes. So it's saying read A, showing us which track it's reading and which side it's reading. And after it did all of this, it booted. So let's do this again. Power off, power on, and there you go. So now, I don't really remember what the second images I selected on here, but we can kind of try doing a directory. Well, let's do a directory on it. And it shows us a bunch of games. Let's see. Okay, empty. There's nothing on it, but obviously that's a different image, and you could hear that it accessed this guy again, except this time when it was reading it, it's going to say read B or RB. So if we do directory 1, read B tells us that it was reading track 17 on drive number 1. It didn't do any seeks or anything because it was already at that track. So great, now we have a way to pretty much boot or load anything that somebody has created, ripped. The files have an HFE extension, and I haven't looked into it, but you just dump a bunch of HFE files on here, and then you select which one you want, and that's what it boots. It acts as two drives. So to see if it works, or to prove that it works, we will go back and let's see, check the directory of drive 0, and there's a bunch of games on here. So let's try invade 2. I mean, you do hear the physical drive running. The reason for that is the way the TRS-80 is set up. It's got a single motor control signal on the ribbon cable. So if you have like a 4-drive system, it will select only the drive that the computer wants to read from or write to, but all of the motors will turn on and all of the drives, and that's why the physical drive keeps turning on. But does this work? Yes. We have yet another Invader copy. I don't have a speaker hooked up to it, but it makes bleeps and blops and everything. But let's now get to the main meat of this episode, and that is, so today, how do you make disk images if you don't have any floppies? All right, so what do we do? Well, first of all, we reboot into DOS, and let's say, for simplicity's sake, we want to make a physical DOS disk. So we take a real floppy and put it in. Exactly the same as what we did before. And now we run backup, which it will run off of drive 0, which is the emulator. I guess that image doesn't contain backup. That's interesting. Okay, let's find another image on the emulator. Hit read error. Interesting. Well, let me have a look at that and see where this is coming from. Okay, I selected another image on the emulator. And now if we type in backup, okay, so now it asks me for the source drive, which is 0. So it's going to basically back up the image we just booted from. And then we're going to go to drive 2 as the destination. I've put a blank disk in that I have bulk erased. And it detects that can't read the floppy. So see, now the light on the floppy's on. And it's doing the same stuff we saw before, except we don't have to swap disk images. Floppy disks, I mean. So it's doing the 2-drive copy, no manual intervention required. And backup's kind of nice. It doesn't do a track-by-track copy, but it actually is a smart copy. It checks what valid data there is on the disk, and that's the only thing it copies. Yeah, now see, our previous copy went faster. I get there are more files on this image because it actually went all the way to track 34. So at this point we should have a bootable disk, but in order to test that, I'm going to have to take the emulator off of the floppy cable and plug in the part of the floppy cable that goes into the emulator into the physical drive, because the way it works on the TRS-80 is all the drive selects and all the drives are shorted, but they remove pins in the headers of the drive cable and only let, like, this is for drive 0, so only the select signal for drive 0 is live on this part of the cable. The others, you have to pull pins out of this cable. Yeah, I know it seemed a little weird, but they made thousands of these machines, and some bean counter must have figured out that it saves you 38 cents in the production process. But let's see. Okay, I unplugged the HxC and put the part of the cable that was connected to it into the physical drive. We still have the disk in here that we just copied. So remember, don't close the drive door if you're going to power cycle it. but let's see if it can boot off the disk we made from this guy, from a software image. And voila! With a maximum of effort, we actually created a physical floppy disk. And let's see what else is on this disk, because it copied a bunch more stuff. Not that much else actually, but well, there you have it. So after all of this, now you know how to do physical copies, and now the question is, okay, so what if I want to make games? Well, there are ways to create your own images, but you need the original discs for that, which defeats the purpose. But there are many kind souls out there who have made disk images. For this guy, they have an HFE extension, and what you do is you dump them on the SD card, and basically what you can do is set the disk 0 image to a TRS-DOS image, the disk 1 image to whatever, let's say you got a disk with games on it, whatever that is, and then do a disk copy from drive 1 to drive 2. And you can make as many physical floppies as you have time to, and as many blank floppies that you have. And this is basically, I guess this is the Rosetta Stone on how to make physical floppy disks. There's of course the philosophical question of why do we even want to make floppy disks if we have this guy for the fun of it, and to keep things original, and to be able to know that you got a TRS-80 that is completely original. I mean, this goes away, but you can make floppy disks, and you can boot them off here, and you can run a bunch of stuff from actual floppies, exactly how we did it in the late 70s. So there are other solutions nowadays, and I'm sure you heard of them, or some of you may have heard of them, but it's this. It's called a Gotek. It's a floppy emulator, and it was made by a totally different company, and the software it came with wasn't very good. The HxC worked better, but HxC finally got smart and said, hey, we will write firmware for this, and for $10 we'll send you the firmware and tell you how to flash this thing so it has the same functionality as the HxC. Not to be outdone, of course, an independent guy, wrote his own firmware called Flash Floppy, which is open source. So you can buy one of these, which costs about a third of the HxC, flash it with the Flash Floppy firmware, and have something that is functionally almost identical to this. But we'll talk about the Gotek on the Model 1 next time. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.